My name is Nicoletta Pireddu. I'm the inaugural director of the Georgetown Humanities Initiative. And on behalf of all my colleagues, I wish to welcome you to Digital Humanities, Practices and Reflections. This is the third and last event of our Humanities in Action series, aiming to promote on-campus conversations about different forms of engagement and outreach for humanities pedagogy and scholarship beyond the classroom and the classic single-authored monograph. A snapshot of current pedagogical and scholarly practices in the humanities would be deeply incomplete without a focus on the role of digital tools and platforms in redefining disciplines and modes of inquiry. They enable scholars and students to ask new questions, to embark on projects otherwise difficult to pursue, to foster collaborations, and to make research more accessible outside the university setting by informing and engaging the community. Tonight, members of Georgetown University will share their experiences in digital humanities with a variety of goals, methods, and outputs, and will discuss the opportunities and challenges of collaborative scholarship and public engagement through digital resources. I am delighted to introduce our panelists. Francesco Ciabattoni, professor of Italian literature. He has published in international journals on Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, Pasolini, Primo Levi, and the interplay between music and literature. Among his books are Dante's Journey to Polyphony, the co-edited volume The Decameron, Third Day in Perspective, and La citazione è sintomo d'amore. Professor Ciabattoni is also the founder of the first bilingual website about Italian songwriters, italiansongwriters.com. The digital project he is currently participating in involves other universities, as we will hear, with the pivotal contribution of Laura Morreale, a visiting scholar at Georgetown. She is a cultural historian of medieval Italian and French language, serving as chair of the Digital Humanities and Multimedia Committee of the Medieval Academy of America, and also as an executive board member of the Digital Medievalist. She is the creator and editor of numerous digital projects, such as the Digital Documentation Process, which is a standardized citation and documentation system for born digital projects, and Middle Ages for Educators. She is also co-editor of the forthcoming volume, Medieval Studies, Digital Methods. Tonight, we welcome two other members of the Georgetown community who work together in digital humanities. Chandra Manning, professor of history. Her research, teaching focus on slavery, civil war, and emancipation in US history, but she also teaches a class on the history of baseball. She authored 2 books, neither of which, she says, had anything to do with digital history, but I can assure you that they are both groundbreaking. One is titled Troubled Refuge, Struggling for Freedom in the Civil War, and the other, What This Cruel War Was Over, Soldiers, Slavery, and the Civil War. In the fall of 2019, Professor Manning taught the course Finding DC's Civil War African-American Sites, centered entirely on the creation of a digital history project, exploring an important but overlooked aspect of Civil War history here in the National Capital Region. This is the context where Nia Johnson played a relevant role. Nia is a senior in the college, majoring in history and minoring in music. She is the student conductor of the Pep Band and a member of Alpha Pi Omega, as well as of Mask and Bauble. Last year, Nia enrolled in Professor Manning's course. By conducting research, visiting archives, and group collaboration, the class created a virtual story map on the history of escaped slave and free Black communities in and around DC. This project exposed Nia to new methods of research and presentation, and she's excited to share that experience with all of us tonight. We will also hear about the extensive experience of Amani Morrison, assistant professor of African American literature and culture in the English department and affiliate faculty in the Department of African American Studies. Most recently, she served as an inaugural CLIR postdoctoral fellow in African American data curation, working with the award-winning Colored Conventions project at the University of Delaware. Additionally, she has contributed in the Digital Humanities to the Louisiana Slave Conspiracies project at UC Berkeley and to the Visualizing Emancipation project at the University of Richmond. With us tonight is also Matthew Pavasic, teaching professor of English and associate director of the writing program here at our university. He works at the intersections of writing, pedagogy, design, and the public humanities. And in addition to his academic publishing in these domains, he started the DC Adapters Project, a digital archive of folks' uses of the DC flag in Washington, DC. This project has appeared in the Washington Post, Washington History Magazine, and public exhibitions, and we all look forward to hearing more about it tonight. Our moderator is Amanda Phillips, assistant professor in the Department of English and Film and Media Studies. Amanda is the author of Gamer Trouble, Feminist Confrontations in Digital Culture, as well as the co-editor of ADA, a journal of gender, new media, and technology, the Queer Trans-Digital book series with NYU Press, and the Game Studies special issue on queerness and video games. Their other publications can be found in Feminist Media Histories, Queer Game Studies, Games and Culture, Digital Creativity, Debates in the Digital Humanities, and the Fembot Collective. Previously, Amanda was the Immerse Postdoctoral Fellow in Mod Lab at the University of California, Davis. They also served as chair of the American Studies Association Digital Humanities Caucus and were involved in the Transform DH collective's efforts to encourage and highlight critical cultural studies work in Digital Humanities Project. One more remark about our event: we encourage questions from the audience, so you're welcome to submit your questions through the Q&A feature. We will devote attention to your questions towards the end of our event. Thank you very much. Now I'm happy to leave the floor to Amanda Phillips.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta, and thanks for everyone for being here today. It's very exciting always to have more events highlighting DH on campus. I know there are many of us at Georgetown who have been building this community over time. I see several folks in the audience actually that have been really involved in that, so it's exciting to see everyone here. The way we're going to run our panel today is each of our featured panelists is going to take about 3 to 5 minutes to talk about the projects they've been working on, and then we'll do a little bit of a short conversation amongst the panelists and turn to audience questions afterwards. So without further ado, I think since we are trying to keep screen time to a minimum, let's go ahead and get started with Francesco to talk about the work that he and Laura have been working on.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy that we are all here to discuss what Laura, I, and a bunch of other scholars have been doing for the past 7 months. This has been a collaborative effort, but not that much of an effort per se, because it's been a lot of fun. Let me tell you what this is about in brief. Maybe, Laura, we can start showing our PPT here, our presentation. The Deifera Project is a project that consists in the digitization of a work by Renaissance polymath Leon Battista Alberti, an Italian who was not only the architect of Santa Maria Novella, but also a prolific writer. And this work in particular is dated to approximately 1430, so belongs to the young age of Leon Battista Alberti. It's a philosophical dialogue between Polymacro, the lover who is not reciprocated his beloved woman Deifera, does not love him back. And so all the drama comes out of the conversation between Polymacro and his older friend / master, Filarco. The conclusion is that love is a sickness and one is better off just making with that. So in a nutshell. But what is interesting about our work is that it provided about 9 scholars of the humanities the chance to do this work in a collaborative way. Now, Dr. Morreale, Laura will in a minute explain all the details, but usually the transcription and then translation, which is what we've been doing, of a manuscript from is a work that we do in solitude, sitting by ourselves. And it's an essentially contemplative work. But the beauty and the usefulness of this is that we have been able to share, to make this a collective effort and a collective activity, so that we were able to exchange ideas and opinions about the manuscript, the author, the meaning, and all the paleographical philological details, including, of course, also all the encoding in HTML. And I think we can move to the next slide. And I can just leave the floor to Dr. Morreale, who will tell about the technical details and all.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So the manuscript that we're working from is hosted at Harvard University. It's the Houghton TYP 422 manuscript. And I just want to give you a sense of how it was that we were able to come around this manuscript altogether. The workflow here it's pretty simple, right? We've got this digitized manuscript. And for anybody who's interested, it happens to be a IIIF formatted manuscript that you can grab, right? So we've taken the images of the manuscript, then we loaded them up into a transcription platform called From the Page. It's a very simple platform. You simply have the image on one side and the transcription pane on the other. And then, we all did our work. And once we were done, we would export that data, right? So all of our transcriptions and translations, we have exported that. And then the next step is to create a digital project where all of our stuff will reside. It's a Georgetown hosted website. And in terms of, so that's sort of the technical stuff, but how does it work in the day-to-day? What happens is that we have our team members who come together, and since April, we have met twice a week over Zoom to do our work, to transcribe and then to translate, to create this digital edition with these images and essays that are showing up now on a platform called Digital Mappa. Now here is the Georgetown site, and this is pretty much in a sort of a prototype version right now, but this will just give you a sense of our final product after we do all of this work. And so in lieu of us taking you step by step, sort of page by page through the project, Professor Ciabattoni and I thought instead that we would invite you, the participants, on a bit of a scavenger hunt. So if you all go to the tiny URL that I have up on the screen there, that's tinyurl.com/Deifera with a PH. There are 3 items that we would like you to try to find. And if you find them, just go ahead and stick the link in the chat and we'll sort of let you know if you're right or not. So there are 3 things that we want you to look for. We want you to first find the names of 3 other scholars with whom we are working on the project. So just put the link up for that. We'd like you to find a diagram that shows how the manuscript was put together. So just fuss around a little bit in the project then. And then also, if you can find a link to the version of the text that includes a transcription, a manuscript image, and then an error message for things that we have not quite gotten right yet. So we're going to let you do that, sort of an interactive type thing. And while we're talking about that, I did want to just, so we're going to give you about, 3 minutes or so. We probably have about a maximum of 3 minutes. I'm watching the time. And in that time, I had asked Professor Ciabattoni to talk, more specifically about, since he's sort of new to digital work, or this kind of digital work, the things that he found most beneficial or difficult or really interesting about the digital that you can't do traditionally. And I think that's one of the really interesting questions that we might want to pose or put out for our listeners. Why would you take the time to invest in doing digital work, right? We can all we're all historians or humanities scholars, right? We know how to do our work, but why would you take that extra effort to do the digital? What's the benefit of doing that? So I'll just leave that question open while you all are doing your scavenger hunt.
Of course. So in brief, I have to say, from the scholar/teacher point of view, the researcher's point of view, doing this work in a group is, first of all, especially in the time of pandemic, when social activities are limited or non-existent, it's actually a refreshing moment in your week. We've done this twice a week for 7 months. And I have to say, I've been looking forward to each of our meetings, because we also created a group that's very friendly, and the opportunity to work with other people from other universities, because colleagues from Fordham, from Harvard, from Rutgers University are involved, is invaluable. It's something that you usually only get at conferences or in group works, but it's rare. And now it's so easy to do it via Zoom, for example, or other platforms. And so you not only learn how to HTML encode certain abbreviations, for example, or certain marks that you find on the manuscript page. I find that fascinating, because you pass from observing the scan of the manuscript to translating every bit of information, perhaps even just a stain of ink or a small faint punctuation mark, into a code. And for someone like me who has never done coding before, because I did completely different things in my life, this is a fascinating thing. And then, of course, you get to see the result. You get to put it on a platform. There are many different ways of doing this. We just use some, I guess, very simple platforms. Right now, for example, we are sharing a Google document to do the translation. And so while Laura, who is the mastermind and the soul of the project, types in, everybody offers their ideas and their professional opinions about how to translate a certain word, a certain expression, etc.
I'm going to interrupt you, Francesco, because we have some winners.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So Astrid Weigert has. I'm sorry. So Devin has found the transcription and image problem, right? Astrid Weigert has found our co-workers, Susanna Barcella and Christina Bruno. Erin Deloach has also found the error message, and Joan Mandel has also found our co-workers. There are co-authors. Brian Alexander and Erin Deloach has gotten all the names as well. So, all right, well done, everybody. Did we get all three? Oh, no, we're still working on that collation thing. So if anyone can find the collation.
Yes, and let me just, if I may, since we've been actually naming the names, the group of scholars that have been involved are indeed Susanna Barcella from Fordham University, Cristina Bruno, who also works at the Center for Medieval Studies at Fordham University. For a while, Maria Teresa De Luca at Rutgers was with us, and Isabella Magni. Now we have Marie Richards, who is an independent scholar, Paolo Scartoni, who is a graduate student at Rutgers, and finally William or Bill Stoneman, who is a former curator of early books and manuscripts at Harvard University's Houghton Library, indeed. And so this is the band that we've been playing with.
All right, so Devin Shanahan has founded the collation diagram, which is not unfortunately displaying for him, but I think that is about our time. So thank you to everybody for engaging in our scavenger hunt. You did a fantastic job. And if there are any questions about how our project works, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. Thanks so much. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. And that scavenger hunt was super fun. So thanks for that activity. More ideas of what to do in Zoomlandia for the rest of the semester. Next, we're going to turn to Dr. Chandra Manning and Nia Jordan.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks to everybody else. It's fun to be here. It's fun to hear from all of these people who worked in the digital humanities. It must be said, much more extensively than I have. And I bring this up not just for the purposes of self-deprecation, although I do have to say that to me, DH means designated hitter. But I really do want to emphasize the low barriers to entry for a neophyte, because that's something I didn't know until last fall, and I'm glad to know it now. I would like to talk in conjunction with Nia Jordan, student in the college. I would like to talk about a project that a history class did last fall. And I'm going to pull that project up now so you can see my screen, and you won't see Nia or I just now, but you'll see us at the end. So let me pull that up if I could. And hopefully that is showing. This project, called Escaping Slavery, Building Diverse Communities, is a digital history project that tells the story of formerly enslaved men, women, and children who ran to the national capital region during the Civil War, settled in Washington and its environs, and from there really affected the outcome of the war, the process of emancipation, and the face of the capital region. And it's a story that isn't very well known. I have written about it in a book, which maybe 27 people read. And so what I really want to emphasize in my discussion of the digital humanities is I thought that Francesco and Laura showed us a great example of digital humanities potential for enhancing research. I want to talk about the potential of the digital humanities for two other aspects of the university's purpose, and that is teaching and serving the public good. And this project was really fun because it allowed us to do both of those things at the same time. And I'd like to make three brief points about it. One was, this project from the outset was designed to speak to a broader audience. The National Park Service came to me and really wanted some help learning more about this aspect, this under-recognized aspect of Washington, D.C.'s history. And they wanted some kind of a public-facing project, something that could live on the National Capital Region's website, and it now lives some other places too, that interested visitors to Washington could visit and learn more about. And so the digital humanities really offer us, as members of a university community, a really unique way to speak outside of campuses and to a broader community. And that's one thing that in my career, I feel like the digital humanities have made easier to do. The second point I'd like to emphasize is that the digital humanities create unique opportunities for student learning. In building this project, each student in the class became an expert on a particular neighborhood for a particular number of years. And they learned about that neighborhood for a number of years, and they created an individual story map about their neighborhood. But then the real work, well, that was real work number one. Real work number two was, as a class, we then compiled all of those stories into a bigger story that actually transcended the sum of its individual parts to tell a story of the National Capital Region. And that's what you're looking at, this story map here. To do that, students had to collaborate, and they had real-time historical debates. They had a long debate about how to put this thing together. That they didn't know it at the time, but they were really engaged in a historiographical debate about whether the story of emancipation is one of continuity or discontinuity. They got into like fisticuffs practically over whether we should tell this thing as a continuous story or not. And it was really important that that happened, because it highlighted for them, in ways me telling them wouldn't, how really contentious some of these issues are. And then finally, the last point I would like to make before handing it over to Nia, who can tell you more than I can about what students learned through the process, is that the digital humanities can also just plain be beautiful. Each of the students created a map that embeds in this larger map. And the individual projects themselves are truly gorgeous, especially Nia's. And so I'd like to go to Nia's map now, and then I hope Nia will join us, will join us and talk to us about her map and about her experience. And here is Nia's beautiful work on Alexandria.
Yes, thank you, Professor Manning. So I had the great pleasure of working in Alexandria specifically. And as you can see, I spoke on how Alexandria as a community, people fled to this port area, but not only that, but it also already had a pretty affluent and big freedmen community. But not only just what I specifically did, also what the rest of the students did. Some, I believe it was a class of 18, 19, just under 20 of us. We all went out, as Professor Manning said, the real work that we did, going to archives, going to our specific sites, finding what plaques and symbols we could, looking for those different histories and compiling them to tell a story. But the greatest thing I think about our project is that because it is a story map, it is very narrative. As you can see, we don't require you or force you to scroll, but we ask you to scroll through these stories because they aren't just things that you can click through and just look for a quick factoid. There's something that you would like to read and get really immersed in, which I thought was really lovely. But again, with the collaboration, and I do remember those conversations that we had, and some of them were pretty tense sometimes when we disagreed on how we should tell our story. But as is shown in the first page, we ended up sort of connecting them, but not forcing them together, and emphasizing all along that these stories do not in any way define the free Black experience in DC during the Civil War era, not so much as just exploring them and presenting them to people. And actually, that's another point. Going into this class, knowing that what we were creating was going to be very public, not just a paper that we were going to write for our professor that they would read and then we would give it a grade and then never think about it again. The fact that this is in fact a public website not only allowed us to, I think, conceptualize our ideas in that narrative way, but also understand that we can make an impact through digital humanities. So I hope you guys get the chance to check out the story maps because I think we did a really great job as a class. Thank you.
Wanted to make sure you got a chance to see Nia at the end there because she really did do such beautiful, beautiful work. And I just close by picking up on the last point that Nia made. One way in which the digital humanities made something possible in teaching that isn't always connects the 2 points I made, one about teaching and one about the university's call to serve the public good. And that is, in students, I often feel a real hunger for their work to serve the greater public. And the Digital Humanities Project created an opportunity to do that. And so that was another, I think, way in which it really enriched students' experiences. So I will put the URL for the project in the map and encourage you to see the students' wonderful work. And thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you so much for that showcase, and it's really great to see how students can be involved in digital humanities projects in the classroom and also in a research context, right? Or how those two sort of can flow together. Next up, we're going to have Dr. Amani Morrison.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be in such great company, talking about something that has held my interest since I was an undergraduate at the University of Richmond. So my approach to kind of my contribution to this talk differs a little bit in that I don't have my own personal digital humanities project, but rather I have had the experience of working on a few large-scale digital projects at various institutions. And so I really want to speak from that experience. I'll share my screen quickly, and I'm just pulling up my own website here, where I kind of have a kind of overview of my digital humanities. And I'll start from the bottom where as a undergraduate, I worked with the Digital Scholarship Lab at the University of Richmond on the Visualizing Emancipation project. And it was a mapping project. My responsibility as an undergraduate was to essentially look at digitized Civil War correspondence and to code for instances of emancipation. So whether that was self-manumission, whether that was Union lines moving and overtaking spaces where there were enslaved people, et cetera, and coding for that. And that was really interesting project. I did that for a year. And then when I got to grad school at UC Berkeley, I was able to work on the Louisiana Slave Conspiracies Project. And just as an aside, I'll note, I'm a 20th century scholar of African American studies. So, but most of my digital humanities work has been in the 18th and 19th century. So the projects have also been able to, for me to, have been an opportunity for me to expand the scope of kind of my research capacity and allowed me to familiarize myself with another century and a half's worth of history in a different way. So with the Louisiana Slave Conspiracies Project, I was really contributing there, again, working with mapping, and I was contributing Black geographic thought and perspectives from African American studies on how to represent archival material about an oppressed people, so enslaved people, as they conspired for their freedom and as that conspiracy was foiled. How to think through the archive and render it spatially from documents where there were testimonies about that had conflicting information, right, from the conspirators. How to represent power relationships without reifying them. So we worked with Drupal as a platform to kind of represent the kind of relational aspects of the data. And I'll just pull up one of the page instances of the LSC project here. This is the places. This is an aspect I contributed to with researching plat maps, historical plat maps from the 18th century and trying to confirm the ownership of various land plats to understand spatially how the conspirators had to have moved, where they might have been able to conspire in order to really create a tool to offer to those interested in this story. So that was a very interesting and rewarding experience. Also worked with the American State Papers to confirm some of this land ownership. And so just dealing with the uncertainties of data and still trying to work through how do you render those data in a way that you can still create a narrative, and you don't want the narrative to be too overarching or too definitive. So how do you leave space for that uncertainty? And so that project was very rich in providing opportunities to dialogue with people working across different states, working in Point Coupee, Louisiana, in the archives there, working with transcribers and translators, working with undergraduate students, working with librarians, working with professors, working with graduate students. And so really being immersed in the very collaborative facets of DH work. And then as a postdoctoral fellow with the Colored Conventions Project, with a clear postdoc, I shifted my contributions, and I worked a lot on website usability. And this was also a very rewarding experience. So for one, I was able to think through the importance of navigating a site. We think about how cool it is to render something digitally and, the skills you're able to build, but thinking about if we want people to access our research, we have to, and it's digital, right? We have to think about how the user can attain the information. And so one of my contributions here was just the landing page. If I didn't pull up the Visualize Emancipation Project, but from my work with the project and just researching other exemplar projects, I was able to bring to this project just a simple kind of pop-up, because we were merging the website from one website to two link sites, and we needed to give instruction. And so something as simple as a pop-up was able to kind of direct the users, and in leading the website usability testing, really understand where people were getting lost as they navigated the new sites. And just lastly, I'll go to the Mapping Inequality project, which is another digital scholarship lab project through the University of Richmond, which I didn't contribute to, but I teach from often. So just last week in my class on the Harlem Renaissance and the Black Chicago Renaissance, I had students in their Zoom breakout rooms analyzing some of these redlining maps and choosing a city and clicking on, the city, clicking further into the map, looking at the scan, looking at these descriptions, to see kind of what was happening with racial segregation. What was the language that was used? What are the values that are presented? How do we understand representation spatially through maps, but also through language? And so the students, I think, got a lot out of that, which, you get a different thing in assigning something that's not just, right, a book, right? And not just a book. Clearly, I am an English professor, so I value books highly, but understanding that people learn in different ways and being able to really tap into that, I think, has been some of the beauty of working with DH.
Thanks so much, Dr. Morrison. And it's really great to see sort of like the place that DH has had over various stages of your career. So it's a nice sort of showcase for all of us of the possibilities. Our last panelist is Dr. Matthew Pavasic. So I will go ahead and turn it over to him.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda. And wow, what a powerhouse lineup of projects. It's a tough thing to go last in this group, but I will try to carry my small amount of the weight here. So I'm here to share with you tonight my DC Adapters project. I'll screen share in just a moment. But let me also just drop a link to the project in case folks want to kind of peruse things as I'm offering some opening comments. There you go. So when I started the DC Adapters project in 2013, I was deeply immersed in two aspects of rhetorical theory. The first one is called rhetorical ecologies. It's where complexity science meets rhetoric. And the second one was visual rhetoric, which is, of course, sort of focuses on images and persuasion. Right alongside that moment, I was moving to Washington, DC in 2011. And very quickly, I noticed, as so many people do, the sort of attractive, elegant, simple design of the Washington, DC flag. I noticed what a passion local folks have for the flag, but most importantly, I was noticing just how much people did here with it. They adapt it, they wear it, they play with it, and use it in all kinds of materials all over the city. So basically, I set out to document what I saw as a visual rhetorical ecology. Digital tools enabled this project from the very start. And Chandra, to echo something that you said, they're simple tools that enabled my very low barrier to entry at the very start too, right? I'm talking about iPhones with which I took all these photos. I'm talking about Tumblr, which is where this project started. I've gone through multiple iterations since, and you may be taking a peek at the website now, which is a sort of much more complex operation. But that's where it started. So for this short presentation, I'll just I'll share a couple of top level findings, and let me screen share now, if I may. Okay, so this is the homepage for the project. The couple of top level findings that I'll share with folks tonight are a direct result from working at a scale that I wasn't really accustomed to and working at a scale that was enabled by the digital tools I was working with. So if you click over to this page on the left side, you can see that there's the full gallery. I can sort by date, neighborhood, and adapter. But the important bit right now is the fact that at this point, I now have documented over 1,000 unique images of adapted DC flags all over the district over 7 years. And it turns out, perhaps unsurprisingly, that the most important issues in DC life show up in our visual landscape. So as recently as this summer, I was documenting coronavirus adaptations to our flag. This summer, in the wake of the racial justice activisms and movements and protests, we were documenting images like this one that showed up in Judiciary Square. And of course, anybody who's lived here a while or read anything about DC knows that this area struggles with economic and demographic displacement and gentrification, and street artists are responding to that. If you live here, you may have heard of the Can't Mute DC movement. And so this is the kind of thing that this project documents. Over time, I've discovered that adaptations come from, of course, folks from all walks of life, but street artists, businesses of all sizes, and local politicians have turned out to be the sort of most prominent contributors to our visual landscape. local politicians, especially when they're running for office, as you may have noticed in the last couple of months, the placards that simply litter the entire district. Almost all of them have a flag of some sort, stars and bars incorporated. This project has also led me to a new sort of more traditional writing project that I'm currently working on. It's become quite clear that documenting this visual ecology, it's helped me to identify sort of three functions that people pursue with this work, with these sort of acts of rhetorical making. Individuals and groups engage in sort of acts of individual identification. They engage in acts of tactical maneuvering, especially over like streets and blocks and neighborhoods. And then lastly, and this is maybe closest to my heart in a way, all kinds of folks just engage in aesthetic acts of beautification and joy. And that's made the project itself a real joy to work on. I'll just jump over to this page on which I opened. Apparently maps are still just as popular as they have been over quite a few years. A lot of our projects feature maps, and I have one on my project as well. One of the things that I was able to discover by working at the scale that this sort of digital map enabled was that it's the neighborhoods that are undergoing the most change in DC. And I mean demographic change, economic change, architectural and structural change. It's those neighborhoods that also see the densest clusters of flag adaptation activities. So these adaptations are essentially enacting debates over the present, the past, and the future of the city. So we see, for example, we can click into these and look at all the individual flag adaptations and pins where I found them, but it's Columbia Heights and Mount Pleasant where I found many more flag adaptations, for example, than in Cleveland Park when I moved to this neighborhood a number of years ago, or even in our own Georgetown neighborhood, which of course has had a fairly stable population. It was gentrified, of course, at one point, but that was a very long time ago. I'd also note here too that my methods are more like the flaneur than the scientist or the sociologist. I collect these in my everyday movements about the city. And so you'll see that the sort of my findings are significantly overrepresented in Northwest where I live and I work. So let me take us off screen share. And I'll just end with this, which is to say that like for a lot of folks, my work in DH is essentially about enabling public connection, circulation, and sort of public humanities work as well. This project has been a real generator for me of collaborations that have been terribly fulfilling, but also it's been an incubator for new ideas. The site that we just looked at would have been completely impossible if it weren't for my friendship with a web developer named Jeremy Morrow. It's way beyond my own abilities. That's why it's no longer a Tumblr. It has a map and it's on this site now. And I'm not going to dive into describing these, but I would also say that in the last 2 years, this project has led me to create a new video project in 2019 that also was a result of a collaboration. And in 2020, I started a public art project that spun off from DC Adapters with other collaborators. That's been delayed by the pandemic, of course, but I hope to kind of rev that back up as soon as it's safe to get out in public spaces in the ways that this project imagines. So again, collaboration and incubation of new ideas. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks so much. So we have about 15 minutes left in the panel. We've had 1 or 2 questions come through the Q&A, but of course I invite the audience to submit any questions that you have either through the Q&A interface, or I don't know if you have access to the chat or not. I will say before we sort of open up our conversation that we've seen a lot of different types of projects that are sort of encompassed under the DH umbrella. And one of the things, as someone who's been more of like a rabble rouser than a member or rabble rousing member of the sort of like big DH community, is that it's a community, a scholarly community that's always sort of like pushing for the inclusion of more and more approaches, even as from the outside it can seem sort of exclusive. So I'm really glad we have these projects here that are using sort of like simple web interfaces. And I remember I was really struck by a big DH scholar who once said, he hopes to see DH just soon be H, right? Where it's all about how we use computers in our regular, just sort of humanities work. I'm always hoping for that as well. I do want to give a shout out to Megan Martinson, who is here in the audience with us. She's our DH librarian at Lau. And definitely, if you have aspirations to do any sort of digital project, you should start by talking to her. She knows everything about everything and has even helped me in my own sort of like getting students started on their projects and such. Okay, so to sort of like have, while we're waiting for audience questions, to get our conversation rolling, I think with the variety of projects, we've seen how they can be integrated into research, into teaching, and also into public humanities, right? Which has been a really important thing that Georgetown in particular has been sort of pursuing for researchers. And I'm wondering from each of the panelists, how these projects have fit into your sort of like professional profiles, right? Thinking about advancement and that sort of thing, because I know this is one thing that has always scared folks who are thinking about doing digital projects. It seems like a lot of work for potentially not a lot of reward. So what has your experience been in sort of how projects have enriched your professional lives?
Well, if I can just very briefly answer in part the question, I guess, for me personally, it has, this project has given me the opportunity to share my doubts in, with a group of scholars and colleagues, most of whom are more knowledgeable than me, but some, in any case, share the same doubts and sometimes I would say the same shyness. Otherwise, I would have had to go find someone, ask the question, someone who might know the answer, think about the question in my mind, think very hard why I'm asking this question. Instead, it all came naturally and with hands-on in our group sessions. So that simplified the process of even asking the questions and learning all the little bits. So that's one of the greatest values for me, and that's it.
I might answer that question in a slightly different way. We talked about it just briefly before the session began. I mean, I think one of the reasons that scholars worry about doing digital work is that there seems to be no citation method that allows the work that you do to enter into the scholarly ecosystem. And there definitely are templates that are being developed so that, when you have a tenure profile or when you're applying for a fellowship, everybody understands the work that goes into a digital project. And so that is for the digital humanities community to work on, but I'm just going to suggest that people are working on it and we are thinking about how we can, give credit for the kinds of work that's being done digitally, right? Which uses those same skills that we use as humanities scholars. So I'll say that.
I would just briefly add to that, I guess, that it's been my experience that digital work actually generates traditional scholarly work alongside it. It's sort of a rising tide that raises all ships as opposed to detracting from the other. But I would also say, just in terms of my own personal experience, that as somebody who's on the teaching track, not on a tenure line, frankly, I think, for all the problems with folks who end up working off of the tenure line, like the conditions of that labor, I'm not sure that I would have felt the freedom to pursue something like this if I had been on a tenure line. And that's, well, I guess that's just exactly as complicated as it sounds.
I'm conscious of answering from a position of having tenure and so not having to worry about those questions, and it's a position of privilege that makes me a little wary of even answering, but I will answer just from my perspective, and that is, honestly, what this project did for me is a lot what it did for students. I share their hunger to find ways for our work to reach outside and to serve some sort of public good. And so for me, this project and follow-up work I've done for the Park Service since answers that particular need. So less my how to get tenure need and more my how to live with myself as a scholar. It helps, it does that for me more than a tenure track advancement.
And I can speak just briefly. As I kind of noted, I started my interest from kind of an employment fair as an undergraduate student, and didn't know what digital humanities was. And after seeing it, I became more interested in the possibilities of research, actually. And it was kind of by chance that I was talking to one of my advisors in grad school, and he was talking about he had to go to some meeting because he needed to talk to some grad students about this digital project he was working on. I was like, oh, I didn't know you had a digital project. I worked on this digital project. And he's like, oh, I didn't know that you have to be on this project, because it's really important to be able to build a narrative and various narratives about your scholarly kind of trajectory. And so that opportunity allowed me to kind of work collaboratively, help to write an NEH grant, which is always valuable, grant writing, and being able to kind of be in those conversations, right? Be at the table with, as a part of those conversations, as well as really just diversify my skill set and my profile, because as we might, all be well aware, the PhD market, academia is there's an oversaturation of PhDs, right? And we know that, and we're dealing with that crisis. And so feeling the freedom as a graduate student and kind of having that burden lifted off me a little bit, knowing that I didn't have to just get a tenure track job, which I very much appreciate my tenure track job, but I didn't feel the weight that I felt other students felt. I didn't feel like that was the only thing I could do with my degree. And hopefully people know that there are many things you can do with a degree, but academia kind of trains us to think that that's the only thing next. And digital humanities really allowed me to pursue, look into various opportunities for myself, which I think contributed to kind of my diversity of thought around my more traditional scholarship, honestly.
And also for fellow undergraduate students who may be listening to this panel, I think it provides a great, well, not to at all minimize the importance of DH, but it's a great answer to any job interview question, to have this experience and to be able to have, collaborated with people on such a public and important, well, from my point of view, important level. But not only that, also being able to demonstrate the knowledge that you've gained throughout a semester or throughout your work life or your career in different methods. So moving from writing a paper to creating a story map, or moving from writing a short response, or just going on a discussion board to creating a website. I think that's really valuable.
Thank you. And Nia, you kind of set us up for, we've got 3 questions from the audience that are all sort of revolving around the student experience, right? And I think since we're so short on time, I'm going to read all 3 of them. And I think perhaps your responses can address the 3 different concerns. So first we have from Catherine Randolph. How would you recommend students working on research projects who are most comfortable with written projects incorporate digital humanities strategies to make our work more accessible? Aaron DeLoach asks, to Francesco's point regarding the greatest value of digital humanities, how have students been pivotal in advancing the digital humanities in terms of asking different questions or bringing in new ideas? And Aaron Herbst asks, perhaps on the other hand, how can you imagine DH projects being valuable and available outside of academia, especially for students who do not have time to start a new research project at Georgetown? So I will let that sort of guide your responses if anyone has any thoughts about any of those.
Well, perhaps I can just briefly address Aaron DeLoach's question. We've had 2 graduate students in our group, and they have contributed significantly to the entire project, especially I would say the philological and translation parts. We have not yet used the Deifera project in a class teaching environment. The project is actually still ongoing, still in progress. We haven't finished every part of it. So I am eager to see if we can employ it in a teaching environment and see what the students do with that, and perhaps even give us new ideas, as you suggest.
To the question about, students being more comfortable with written projects and trying to think through how to pivot into, I would say, DH. So this semester, I have my students working in small groups on kind of like small WordPress sites. And the assignment was to create a digital exhibit or a digital magazine showcasing different cultural objects of the Harlem Renaissance that we weren't going to be able to get to in class, as a way of kind of further in instructing their peers around, kind of what was the cultural representation landscape like. And the assignment is doing close reading. So it's something that they do in their papers, but it's been interesting to see just the shift, how students struggle with, wait, but what are you asking me for? And I'm like, hey, if you were walking through a museum and you read the little placards, what are you looking for to see? What would help someone? And just trying to relate things to things that students are already familiar with, and using that, those are small pivot points. It's like, okay, I know you know how to do this close reading. I know you know how to string sentences together. Let's put that on a website. Let's add a background color to it, and let's create a hyperlink to another page that you created in an outside source. And kind of using those baby steps as a way for them to think through kind of the labor of doing both the analysis, doing the research, but also in creating something public facing. And the sites are not going to be live to the public because of copyright, et cetera. And I didn't want the students to have to think about the degree of polish, but I wanted them to master the skills. And I think that was a very interesting exercise they're due this week, so I'll see how it turned out. This is my first time kind of working with it, but I think the students are being stretched, but not overwhelmed, if that makes sense.
And just to follow up on that point too, if I might, I mean, it sort of underscores the fact that the medium is part of the message, right? That we all have to pay attention, even if we're writing a paper or something more traditional, that fits into a sort of medium that also conveys a certain amount of communicative meaning. So it's a good way to make them aware. Oh gosh, I'm shifting. I have to do other things in this particular medium.
If I could, I would like to add just a very practical answer to how to get started. And it also allows me to remedy a real gap in my remarks. And that is, the first thing to do, if you're not sure what you're doing as faculty or students, is to go see Megan Martinson at Lau. So I want to really echo Amanda there. There would be no escaping slavery, building diverse communities without Megan. There really wouldn't. Park Service came to me and wanted the story map platform. I didn't have to make any of those decisions. It's part of ArcGIS, and it's free. But learning to use it, that was all Megan. She taught me. She came in and she worked with the students. As the first step, like how do you get over even the lowest barrier to entry? Go see Megan, because she is really, really amazing.
Yeah, and I'll kind of reinforce what Amani said as well, and getting students to sort of like push their sense of like what counts for school. And that's been one of the most helpful things, as someone who teaches video games, just seeing like the realization and joy on some folks' faces when I tell them like, no, yeah, you can actually, do a live stream for academic credit as long as you are, speaking about games in a particular way. So it can be a really fun and joyful way to make learning more new for them. And the quality of work that they submit is almost always better than what I get in terms of papers anyways. So any last comments from our panelists, and then I will hand it over to Nicoletta to close us out. All right, Nicoletta.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much for this very rich discussion. It has been very enlightening, and I hope it will inspire other people to try this new road. Mindful of time, just a quick closing remark. One thing we have clearly shown from your presentations and the lively discussion that followed is that digital humanities is certainly much more than just humanities done digitally, right? So it's not just a matter of relying on computer technology as a mediating tools in the humanities scholarship and pedagogy, but rather the digital dimension, and something that also Laura was mentioning, echoing McLuhan, right, is that the environment and the delivery vehicle is precisely the digital dimension, a delivery vehicle to create new knowledge and also a new understanding. And I was just thinking that, you know, words like network and web, which belong to the cyber vocabulary, can also connote somehow more broadly and with more imagination all this expanding mapping of multi-directional exchanges and connections that really emerge where the digital intersects with the humanities creative and critical communication. So, you know, from this synergy, we have new types of information, new ways of conceptualizing and also imagining, and means of production and expression that traditionally were considered distinct and separate. So I think, you know, your discussion and all your projects are clearly showing the great potential, with challenges, of course, but inevitably a great innovative tool for both research and pedagogy. Engaging students is crucial, especially at Georgetown. And so I see a lot of potential also with the Humanities Initiative, and inevitably the public-facing dimension of what we do. It's a different language, but it's complementary, and I think it's very productive. It has a lot of potential. So it's 6:01. I think we can close here. Thank you very much for being with us. This is the last event for the semester, but stay tuned for the spring. Many things are in progress, and if you have suggestions, complaints, or also, you know, encouragement for or ideas for other panels and speakers, please drop us a line on the Humanities website. There's a suggestion box, and so we welcome your input. Thank you very much to all of you. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.